All right, in this video, let's talk about the godfather of short stories, William Somerset Maugham's Rain, which is argued by critics to be one of his most famous short stories. We gotta talk about what the heck the ending means. Coming up.
Yeah.
All right, guys, welcome to the CodeX Cantina, or Krypto's Psycho impersonation over here. I'm Una.
And I am Psycho Krypto.
Now, when this story was originally published, it was published as Miss Thompson, not even Rain, which kind of gives it a very different feel, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Very more ominous, I think, with the Rain title.
So published in 1921 in the Smart Set. You can read along for free. We will put a link in the description below for the Project Gutenberg link. Now, with that said, this is our third Maugham, and I think this is his best work yet that we've done. What I think's interesting is 1916, he actually did take a tour of the Pacific, and he actually did go to Pago Pago. And there really was a quarantine, and there really was a Miss Thompson and a missionary on this trip.
It's kind of cool how he takes what he knows to write about these stories, but then he turns it into this very intricate, interesting story. And as you said, I would definitely agree with the critics that this is his best one, or the best one we've read so far.
Now, this is a really good story where basically it's kind of missionaries going on their way of trying to spread the moralistic Christian view, I guess is what it is. And it brings up the important question of, is it easier to pull someone up or is it easier to pull someone down? We'll talk about that here in the talk in the chat, but let's go through a quick plot breakdown of this, and then we'll go into our discussion pieces.
Okay.
So first, the audience is kind of introduced to the four individuals: Miss Davidson, Mr. and Mrs. McPhail, and then eventually Mr. Davidson comes along. They've been quarantined on this island due to a measles outbreak, and there's a torrential downpour that kind of isolates them and keeps them indoors. We learn about Mr. Davidson coming from the Solomon Islands, and where he has met, married, and now works with his wife as a missionary, spreading the good word of the Lord from a Christian church perspective. During their quarantine, they find out there is a Miss Thompson who came from the red light district of Hawaii and is whoring around with them sailors. Mr. McPhail tries to show compassion, but Davidson is relentless and eventually gets the mayor to kind of boot her off the island, amongst other things, where he does not show very much compassion to his fellow man. It's basically his way or the highway. Ultimately, Mr. Davidson, though, is found dead with a razor slice ear to ear around his neck, and they find Miss Thompson in her room calling all men pigs. End plot.
It's like a murder mystery that doesn't get solved. I love it.
I know. This was such a good story. So I got a couple discussion things. First, I want to kind of walk through the ending, because I don't even know if we haven't talked before. We don't even know if we agree on what the ending means. I want to talk through a couple of the symbolism ideas, and then I want to talk through some more about this missionary stuff here. I think we got a good video planned here today. So first of all, do we agree what happened to Mr. Davidson and why? Give me your version real quick, raw, and let's talk about this.
Oh, man, I'm nervous. I got to go first, huh? Yeah, she totally killed him.
We don't agree at all. Okay.
I knew it.
Why is that?
I don't know. She totally killed him.
Give me your evidence as to why.
I think it's the last line. I think that's her confession, because the way that he treated her and the way that the story unfolds, I think that she definitely killed him.
Why did she kill him?
I think revenge for the way that he treated her.
Okay.
To prove that for all his good, he didn't do good. For all that he thought, he was just susceptible as any other man, and he was no better than her, and that he could be killed. He was not invincible.
So your theory is that the sinner did a sin?
She didn't think she was a sinner.
Okay.
Prostitution is the oldest job in the world. It was Mr. Davidson that thought she was a sinner, and she was proving that just because if you're good and pure doesn't mean that you're going to have a perfect life. He got murdered because of how he acted and how he was all hoity-toity snooty about it.
I think he was banging her.
Totally.
You just dropped that part. You didn't even mention it, right?
Yeah, he was totally sleeping with her.
We know that he was banging her because we have this line, Davidson's eyes shone with ecstasy. And moments later, we have the quote, her hair, Miss Thompson's, was tied in a sluttish knot. Right? So we have a lot of implications here. And when he was working with her, we were never in the room. He was always alone. And then he'd come out to the rest of it, right? So you always have to question what was happening behind the scenes there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, so we have this line where if he were murdered, I don't like this line. But Mr. Davidson said, I expect to have my work cut out for me. I shall act, and I shall act promptly. If the tree is rotten, it shall be cut down and cast into the flames. I think he committed suicide because he realized what he was doing was against his version of the good Lord's directive. So he didn't say someone should stop it. He said, I shall act, and I will act promptly. And he will cut out the rotten tree and cast it into the flames. So he's proclaiming that he's going to be the one to destroy evil.
Okay.
A reason why I think this is important is I think with this version of it, and there's plenty of people that are going to take your side.
The correct side.
The correct side, according to Krypto, is there's a traditional view of what the biblical story is. Going out, saving the despot, the person that's in despair. And this is deconstructing it, where he's being pulled down by it instead. If he is murdered, he is not being pulled down. It's the sinner causing a sin, and we just kill him, and that's it. So let's talk about the rain real quick. What does the rain represent to you?
Tragedy.
Now,
everything's perfect at the beginning of the story. There's no rain. As tragedy starts to unfold, the rain becomes harsher.
Now, in a lot of traditional literature, baptism is represented via the rain. When a character's being reborn, the rain starts, right? But this isn't just normal baptismal rain. This is torrential downpour rain.
Yeah, like a tsunami.
You'll notice that it always comes on the harshest when sin's being committed, too.
Okay.
I think what the rain here is the exaggeration of, it's not just baptismal rain. You'll notice Davidson he's supposed to be spreading the good word of the Lord, but he's not, right? He's bending a lot of the missionary's goals, objectives to his own will, right? He says, we're going to put down dancing, like using murder words, like putting down an animal, when they're talking about putting down the sin of the dancing of the natives. When the fisherman was cheating on his wife, he basically drove the man to financial ruin and to leave the island, which is totally not the religious way at all in terms of how you're supposed to handle that, right? You're supposed to turn the person out from the church, according to the Bible, 1 Corinthians, I think it is. But you're not supposed to cause financial ruin or show disdain and attempt to harm someone, basically.
Okay.
It was like a deluge from heaven, and it rattled on the roof of corrugated iron with a steady persistence that was maddening. So like you said, it is the reverse of just like in the previous section where we're deconstructing the traditional Bible redemption story. This rain being the torrential downpour is the deconstruction of the traditional baptism symbol. Both religious methodologies flipped on their head, I feel like.
Okay.
And my last question is the gramophone. Do you know what the gramophone was?
All right, so the gramophone symbolizes depravity, I think. And she turns it on when she's having sex to try to minimize the noise.
Yes. It's covering up the sin.
Yeah. It's
right?
covering up the sin.
So if all she does is get revenge, she's not covering up the sin. She's not representing the oppression of religion coming down and overbearing someone. She's just committing a sin, as opposed to the suicide because of his shame for sleeping with her. It doesn't connect the fact that he's got to cast out the branch, that he shall act and he shall act promptly. It ignores that. And it also ignores the deconstruction of the traditional Bible redemption story. If she murdered him. You can go with that. I'm just saying that those are the obstacles that I think you have to overcome with explaining. One
thing that I think of his note is a quote from Mr. Davidson where he says, "And do you think that the Lord is going to abandon me when I am on his business?" And even though he's killed at the end of the story, if he's really on God's business and he's a faithful man, why would he kill himself?
He killed himself.
Does he have false belief?
He killed himself specifically because he turned away from the Lord.
And how do you support that he turned away from the Lord?
He was adulterous.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on.
I mean, yeah, he was sleeping with her, but
Well,
I don't think he thought there was anything wrong with that.
Oh, I think we have another point, Mr. Krypto.
Okay.
Where did Mr. Davidson come from?
Like, what do you mean?
They said it in the stories, and it is very important. Where did he come from?
I don't remember.
He came from the Solomons. Do you know who Solomon was in the Bible?
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. Keep going.
There's a lot about Solomon in the Bible. What were his biggest sins?
Adultery and idolatry. I've been drinking too much.
So, adultery, because he was sleeping with a ton of foreign wives.
Okay.
Doesn't sound unlike Mr. Davidson, right? And idolatry, because they started to worship other gods. They didn't put... In idolatry, if you're not familiar with that term from a biblical standpoint, it's putting something else before the Lord. It doesn't have to be you worshipped other gods. If you're obsessed with money, if you're obsessed with working, kind of like Davidson, and you start worshiping those things over God, such as power, like what Davidson did here, those are all forms of idolatry. So again, King Solomon related to King David, I believe it was, and we have Mr. Davidson. This is very specifically a reference to the fall of King Solomon with his idolatry, with his adulterous activities, and that's exactly the fall Mr. Davidson went through in this story.
So I think it's odd that we would think that he recognizes that in himself, and that because he's obviously very vain, and he thinks that his way is the best way, and that's the only Lord's way. So I don't think that a person like that would ever turn to suicide. If he truly is a believer like he says he is, he would just ask for forgiveness. He would come clean, ask for forgiveness, and I don't think that he would turn to suicide as a resort to atone for his sins, so to speak.
But I think we agree.
There is no right answer. We don't know.
Right.
You know, and I think that's why this arguably is his best story, right? Is because we don't know whether he killed himself or if she killed him.
And I think what that brings out isn't necessarily just while we're talking about the plot point, what we're using is evidence of the moralistic life that these individuals used. I listened to this in the car originally with my wife, the audiobook version. And she told me this really interesting story about when she was younger and going to, I think it was Sunday school, maybe it was church school, I'm not sure. But she was telling me that they played this game, and there's probably a lot of variations of this. But the idea is one person would stand up on a chair, and the other person would come up on the ground, and the person on the chair had to try to pull the other person up onto the chair with them. And the person on the ground had to try to pull the person on the chair off. You can tell that this game was probably played 20, 30 years ago because schools would never allow that today, right?
No.
But the idea is that the person on the chair, again, there's a lot of different variations, is faith, trying to bring someone up. And the person on the ground is sin or the devil, depending on your variation, trying to pull a person down. And not once, ever, did anyone succeed in pulling someone up. And I think that's why while we're talking about maybe how it happened, this whole story is fascinating because the whole time Mr. Davidson's trying to pull people up, kind of, maybe in a very aggressive, maybe very misconstrued way. And you've got sin that can pull people down. And we both agree that there's adultery happen with the story, and he got pulled down into sin rather easily. And I think the ramifications of that are very different. But I think that's what makes the story so fascinating, is that concept of it's easier to be pulled down into sin than to pull someone up into faith.
I think that brings me to one of my last points of, I think that one of the other things of this story is a patriarch versus matriarch. It seems like there's a little bit of sexism here.
Okay, keep going.
And I don't know if that's a mom thing. I don't know if he's writing it that way on purpose. I don't know enough about him, haven't read enough about him to maybe formulate a good point. But it definitely seems like it's that old adage of, there was Adam and then there was Eve, and who brought sin?
I know what you want me to say, but I'm not going to agree. Eve ate the apple, but Adam was with her and didn't stop her from eating the apple, to throw that last line in there. So it's not, people will say it's woman's fault. It is not woman's fault from a biblical standpoint.
But it definitely is written specifically where it's woman and then man, right? So I think that he's kind of portraying the women more in a negative light in this story. And another thing is like Mrs. Davidson
yeah.
is written in a negative light.
Oh yeah.
And I say one of the things I was going to point out is like how he writes her voice.
I got a quote for you. It says, "The most remarkable thing about her was her voice. High, metallic, and without inflection. It fell on the ear with a hard monotony, irritating to the nerves like the pitiless clamor of a pneumatic drill." Oh,
yeah, that's harsh.
Yeah.
And I feel like that he's painting all the women in this negative way, and I think having Mr. Davidson kill himself is a cop-out at the end. And I think that her killing, and I know this sounds wrong, is almost like redemption. I don't know.
Well, Mr. Davidson wasn't exactly the peach either, right? There's this quote, "There was something sinister about the power of that man." We are not meant to like Mr. or Mrs. Davidson in this story.
No, yeah, we're supposed. I don't think we're supposed to like anybody in this story, really.
I don't know if you're supposed to like...
Sympathize, maybe.
I don't know if you're supposed to like Dr. McPhail, but you experience the story through Dr. McPhail, right?
Yeah.
He does bounce and push back a little bit on some of the harshness. And, shocking. Okay, Mom, he was studying to become a doctor. Naturally, he writes the doctor in this story as the positive, most relatable one. I mean, shocking. Right?
Yeah, right.
Authors will aggrandize themselves in a sense. Okay, I can see where you're talking about that, and I agree. There's more for us to dive into in that space in terms of how he looks at women, and how does he look at women compared to how other writers of the 20s looked at women as well. Right?
Yeah, and I think that it's always kind of portrayed that way, and I think that this is a story not out of time like we've said about some of our authors, but I think it's kind of ahead of its time. He was trying to write it, I think, in a better light.
Yeah,
I mean, this was written, 100 years ago, so I think that he was trying to be generous is a good word.
What's his name? Mr. Davidson have the dream about the mountains that look like breasts.
Yeah. I remember that.
That's a progressive statement for a 1921 story, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're obsessed with breasts.
He was totally banging her. All right, guys. Thank you for checking out our video today. We do literature breakdowns every Monday and Thursday. Please consider subscribing if you'd like to check out some more story breakdowns by us. Una out.
Peace.